I know the bond company said to us before we started, if it wasn't you guys, there was no way we would sign off on this budget and this schedule. This is not rational. And so I went into it knowing that this was just going to be the most difficult shoot that we'd ever attempted.
The first time I had the idea of making a film about Che was when I heard about John Lee Anderson's biography of Che Guevara that he was in the process of writing. And I really didn't know much about Che other than he and Benicio looked alike. And I knew Benicio, so I asked him if he was interested in exploring a movie about the life of Che Guevara, if he had any interest in Che, and he said absolutely.
I definitely thought that you could make, and she did too, that you could make a movie, you can make two, you can make many movies about Che, about his life. Depends what's your approach.
One of the big challenges of making a film about Che Guevara before actually shooting was how to wrestle the huge, dramatic events of his life. And that's really what took us so long to make the movie. I mean, it didn't take 10 years because we had the script and we're ready to go. It took 10 years because it took us that long to figure out, you know, what the movie needed to be from our point of view.
We realized that it was very difficult to tackle. By telling the story of Che, you're also telling the story of a whole country.
The first person we talked to was Chris Dromo, who I had just done Citizen X with before, and he was interested and sort of thought about it for a year and didn't do anything. And then we talked to Chris McQuarrie, who Benicio had just done The Usual Suspects with, and he brought in someone called Peter Buchman, who he'd written Alexander with, to start doing all the research. And Peter did about a year's worth of research in just terms of reading books and things. And in the meantime, we started doing Traffic, and Che got sort of put on the back burner. And when Traffic was finished and we were on the road promoting it, Benicio and I asked Steven if he wanted to do it with us, and he said yes, and we went to Cuba for the first time in July 2000.
The first thing we did is we just looked at what really happened. You know, we tried to get really clear on what happened, and it was sort of detective work.
And one of the surprises for us, just starting on the process, is we had no idea how he died. You know, we knew he'd won the revolution, we knew he was with Fidel, but we didn't know what happened to him after that. And when we started to look at the story of how he died, where he died, and he died in Bolivia, we thought, well, let's just do Bolivia.
With Bolivia, it was a chapter of his life that was much more obscure. People seem to know, oh yeah, he was, you know, killed in Bolivia, but it wasn't quite clear what happened. And so we felt like it was important in that sense to get that out into the open and shed some light on it.
We have made many trips to Cuba, I'd say once a year for 6 years, interviewing people. And what's great about interviewing all those sides is the detail and the points of view that you're getting from each of them that, you know, the other one couldn't know. I mean, to have Gary Prado's story coming in as the Bolivian young captain coming to catch these terrifying, you know, guerrillas in the jungle, I mean, is a different story and point of view than what you get from Pombo or Urbano, who were 16-year-old illiterate peasants that signed up to be in Che's column, went through Cuba with him, and volunteered to go to Bolivia and, you know, die with him there if need be. It's kind of getting a deepening of the picture from all the different sides, and there is a certain neutrality to that. While we were doing this research, Steven, Benicio, and myself, and writer Ben van der Veen, Ben found out that Terrence Malick had been in Bolivia covering the trial of Regis Debray for The New Yorker. And it's just one of those bizarre stories. So I found out how to reach him, and I called him and said, would he like to meet with me and Benicio and Ben? And he said, yes, absolutely. We just became great friends and started talking about the story, and he really helped us shape what could have been just Bolivia. We had a version, and as we were working on it with him, I started to have this feeling that he might want to direct it. He said if Steven didn't want to, he might be interested. We talked about that, and at the end of the day, he went and did New World, because Steven had been busy on something else.
I was one of the many people who was very excited about seeing what Terrence Malick was going to do with the movie. But it got caught in one of those crazy circumstances of like financing and all that stuff.
You know, there was a moment when Terry was interested, and then that wasn't going to work out, and Steven kind of got back in with all, four hands.
By the time I came on board, Benjamin van der Veen had already written a draft of the Bolivian story, and Steven had come back on as a director, and he was sort of taking a new approach to the material and still trying to figure out how to crack it and what he wanted to do.
When I came back on the project, and it was still just Bolivia, I felt that without the context of the Cuban Revolution, that you just had no idea why he kept going. Like, it didn't seem to make any sense. There were so many different points at which any normal person would have said, this isn't going to work, we should stop.
And so we started backing up and saying, okay, you need to see Che in the revolution, becoming Che and winning, to understand what an extraordinary thing is, that this is a man who won power, became, the winner, the head of the country, the king of the castle, and gave it up to go do it again.
And as Steven and Benicio and I started talking about it, we came up with an idea that was initially going to show his rise in the Cuban Revolution, his fall in Bolivia, and a time that he spent in New York speaking at the UN. Initially, I wrote one screenplay that was all three storylines in a single screenplay, and it was about 160 pages or so. But whenever you have to condense as much as I had to condense, you have to start changing history. There's no way around it. Whenever you're condensing time, certain characters end up being combined, and some events end up being combined. There's no way around it. I got together with Steven. He said, I feel like we're just not doing either main story justice, and that we're having to condense too much and change the facts. What if we take the Cuban storyline and the Bolivian storyline and just take them out and make them two separate parts? Write them as two separate movies. At that time was the idea.
In November 2004, we were financed to make one movie in English, and we were going to shoot in New York in January and then go to Mexico and shoot the whole movie in Mexico. And maybe October, November, when Steven realized he wanted to do two movies, not one, and that the script was getting too wieldly intercut, but we wanted to continue to shoot in New York. It had taken me 18 months to get permission to film in the UN, and they had not touched the UN since Che Guevara had been there, and they were about to remodel the UN. And it was really now or never time to film the UN.
I think Steven always liked the idea of shooting in New York and seeing Che. That's Che when he's at his most classic. He's in his uniform, he's got the hat, he's got the look, and just the idea of seeing Che at that point of his career and his look, driving around the streets of New York, I think Steven just fell in love with that image.